And so then we're beginning here with Thomas Adamek, who's on a mission to win the world heavyweight title. Remember, he'd stepped up to the heavyweight division back in October of 2010. Remember when he took on Andrew Golata, the Polish fighter of the century, downed him and followed it up with victory over Estrada, Areola, Michael Grant. All three, though, went 12 rounds. This would be a little bit different here. He was up against another local boy in the name of Vinny Madalone, who down the years had been in with some of the big names himself. He hadn't survived many of them, mind you. He'd been in with the likes of Evander Holyfield. More recently, though, he'd been beaten by Jean-Marc Mormec. But coming off the back of the previous fight against Dominic Alexander, he'd expressed an interest for one more shot at the big time. And Thomas Adamek was only too willing to oblige. It was the home ground for Adamek at the Prudential Center in Newark in New Jersey. He dominated the fight pretty much from the opening bell. The high-pressure technique that he'd adopted since stepping up. And again, that big short right hand teeing him up for the left hook to send Madalone down. He knew he was in basically with a much better man. Plenty of heart he'd given on this night. He'd been given one more opportunity to see what he could do, but it would not last an awful lot longer. Whirlwind of punches as Adamek's hand speed was simply too much for Madalone. The referee just seconds away from stepping in. Adamek, of course, would go on from here to take on Kevin McBride. Referee still a little tardy, really. At this moment, the fight really should have been stopped. Steve Schmoger, of course, we've seen many times on your screens, lives again just down the road, finally stepped in. All smiles for Thomas Adamek. As we said, he'd go on to take on Kevin McBride. He'd go on to beat him. And then the big moment of his career, of course, coming in September of 2011. He went on to fight Vitaly Klitschko. And he put up a decent fight, certainly better than some of the recent opponents. He was stopped eventually by Klitschko in 10. But he still intends to fight on, so he says. And he is literally hero worshipped in these parts. And whenever he fights, you're always assured a big, big crowd. Well, next up to Kim Poulsen, a light welterweight, age 24, from Denmark, 17-1-0 his record. The only defeat of his career was in his fourth fight back in 2007. He was in London against a guy called Tony Jura. He lost on points. Since then, it had been an impressive run of stoppages. Tariq Sabedine, 11-9-0, fought for the French super featherweight title and lost in 2005 in the 6 fights since he'd lost 4 of them. And he was no match for Poulsen here.
5, 6, 7,
big name in Denmark,
8,
hugely popular,
10.
and fills halls, and easy to see why. Blistering performance in this light welterweight international contest, an 8-rounder. And next to another fighter who's been on our screens a number of times over the years, Juan Pablo Hernandez. Early night here for Steve Herelius. Only defeat on Hernandez's career was that loss to Wayne Braithwaite when he was stopped in 3 in 2008. He'd promised it would never happen again, and so far it hasn't. All roads, he hoped, were going to lead to a fight for the IBF title against Steve Cunningham. And Steve Herelius, the Centurion, the French southpaw, he'd also, remember, only been beaten once by a guy called Sosnowski, who stopped him in 9 back in 2007. And both of them had decent knockout percentages of just pushing 50%. But Hernandez, the big money favourite, easy to see why. And the interim WBA World Cruiserweight title would belong to him. Well, next up, the unbeaten 31-year-old Romanian Lucian But, who won the IBF title way back in 2007 against Alejandro Berio. This was an 8th defense of his title against Jean-Paul Mendy, who at 38 was still amazingly unbeaten. He'd held an IBO version of the title. This was his first attempt at a proper world title. There was controversy, remember, when he'd beaten Sakir Bika in the eliminator for this fight, as he was actually disqualified for hitting Mendy whilst he was down. The writing was maybe on the wall, the fact that Mendy was down in that fight, maybe the punch resistance getting a little less for Mendy, but he was still a threat, and Lucian But was not able to take any liberties in here. Round 4, though, would be the round. Trying to do a bit of holding. Mendy, who'd taken quite a few punches in this fight. A stinging jab of Lucian But. He'd used his height and considerable reach advantage that he had over Mendy. Still looked in peak physical condition, though, did Jean-Paul Mendy. And he was determined not to go out without giving a good account of himself, but he really just wasn't allowed to get into this fight against But. He was ranked number 3 middleweight in the world according to Ring Magazine, But. Mendy, a 12-1 betting underdog, was unranked by the Ring Magazine. It was the same magazine that had him, Lucian But, ranked at number 3. Marlon Wright, the referee in charge here tonight, his 8th time officiating a Lucian But bout, his 4th world title fight. And it would be a left hand. Watch the left hand of Lucian But would drop Mendy. Looked as if we were going to make it until the end of the 4th round. But when he does go down, he'd be unable to actually beat the referee's count. Maybe just began to take his mind off what was going on. What a punch, though, it was that would end the night. One of the best we've seen this year. Crashing down onto his jaw. And that was the end of the night. And the first defeat as well, remember, for Jean-Paul Mendy.
The fighting pride of Czechia, Romania, Lучшие.
Well, this was Robert Helenius lining up here. Helenius against Samuel Peter. And Helenius had been just stepping up the quality of his opponents. Peter had a good start to this fight in the opening round, working with his jab to the body as Helenius looked to counter punch and landed with a couple of good combinations. But as the fight progressed through to round 9, a combination cat with the left hand sent Peter down onto his back. He would make it to his feet, and he would walk straight on to a big right hand coming up. Right hand set him up, and the left hook put him down. The referee got to the count of 6 before waving the bat off, as there was no attempts to actually get to his feet. Samapeta remained actually on the floor for a good couple of minutes before he had to be helped back to his corner. And Helenius will roll on. We'll see a bit more of him later on in the show. Now, a few years back, Konstantin Eidrich was thought to have the ability to be a contender. But remember, he'd been beaten by Danny Williams, Andre Pala, Gabenga Alukin KO'd him in November of 2010. He'd had a bad night in Bigger's better. Ed Monzo actually turned him over. And he'd also been beaten by Ty Fields at the Alexandra Palace. Where he was going, nobody quite knew, but he did serve up a reminder of what he was capable of here against Vekuloglu. This was in October of 2011. It was a good night for Konstantin Eidrich here, and there hadn't been too many of them in recent years either. So something for him to celebrate with.
Who's the knockdown timekeeper? Huh?
And moving on to New Zealand for this super middleweight fight between Keshif Mumtaz and Marcelina Massoa. Now, Mumtaz's record of 1-8, lost 28, lost 15 of the last 17. Maslow was 45 years of age and had fought for the WBA belt against a guy called Evans Ashira back in 2005. You might remember him because he took on Joe Calzaghe. He defended it once before he lost to Felix Sturm. Mumtaz down twice inside the first round, and here in the fourth he would go down just the once because he wouldn't get up from that. Might be 45 years of age, but Marcelina Massoa still capable of the big finish. Right then, Tom Doran's nickname is Dazzling. He was in action for this light middleweight international contest against Max Maxwell, a 32-year-old who was a contender for many years on the national circuit. He'd lost only one of the previous 8. This was Doran's second fight of the year after stopping Jamie Bonis in round 1 in March, and he had to come back from a very, very shaky start in this fight. He'd had a bit of a reputation as a big finisher, able to stop this man early on. He was